Welcome, podcast family, once again to Regulation Revolution. This is Barry Vassar. With me, as always, Amy Reamer. How are you doing today, Amy?
I am doing good. How are
There's
you?
there's a big hi from Amy. I believe I'm doing just fine. Folks, thank you for tuning in whenever you do get to hear these. Make sure you check out some of our other podcasts that are out there, some of our other releases. And today, my understanding is we have a very special guest, and I'm going to turn the introductions over to you.
Yay. Yes, we do. An extremely special guest. So I thought about it. So we have with us in the role he's playing today is the one of his work history. So Robbie is a retired police sergeant with 31 years of law enforcement and also 31 years of husband experience. Not concurrently. And father experience, and now pop experience. So Robbie is so all the I guess the releases and all that stuff we're supposed to do. So Robbie is my husband. He is my partner at Heart and Mind, business partner. So partner in business, partner in life. And But he also has an extremely long career and history in law enforcement. So he was in, and if I miss one, Robbie, you can tell me. So he was in uniform patrol, which is what most of us think about as police officers, with doing traffic and working accidents and taking calls and stuff. He was also a sergeant in that. He was a court liaison officer. He was in an undercover unit for a period of time. Um, he was a sergeant over school resource officers, so working with the schools and the officers working in the schools. Um, what did I miss? Anything?
Uh, just trainer in the academy and trainer in our CIT section.
That's right. That's an important one. So CIT is was it crisis intervention training? Is that
Team.
right? Team crisis intervention team. So working on how to when you come across like a mental health type of situation or someone with other types of needs, helping officers to be able to respond to those situations. Did I say that right?
More or less.
So we invited Robbie to come on one of our podcasts to talk about a little bit of polyvagal theory, regulation, and how that relates to law enforcement. Because the relationship, obviously, that police have in with folks and our tigers and their tigers and citizens' tigers and everything else come into play. Robbie also is an extremely good storyteller. So I'm going to let him share a story about an incident that he encountered as an officer. And then we're going to talk about regulation in all kinds of forms in that situation. So, Robbie, I will let you tell your story.
Okay. This was a situation myself and another officer had received a call for a individual in an apartment that had gone off and had become very violent and destructive. And the people in the apartment with him had basically called for help. The other officer got there first. I got there second. The other officer had actually already gone inside when I had arrived. The apartment was a second floor apartment, but their door was on the first floor. And I walked up to the door was open, and I could see in the floor, blood there in the floor. There was walls leading up to the second floor. The walls were covered in blood. Looked like something you'd see in a Friday the 13th movie. That much blood. I run up the stairs. As I'm going up the stairs, I can hear the other officer say, in actually a very calm voice, "Hey, Bubba, you want to put some clothes on for me?" And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, blood everywhere and a naked guy. Great. This is going to be a wonderful call. Get to the top of the stairs. The officer is backing out of a bedroom, and the individual inside the bedroom is coming towards him at a high rate of speed. I can see he is covered in blood. He's very manic. He's yelling and screaming things that are just not intelligible at all. You can't make out what he's saying. and completely naked. Without saying anything, the other officer and myself know that with this amount of blood, this guy has injured himself or somebody has injured him. He needs medical assistance and he needs it right away before he bleeds out. The entire living room of this apartment was covered in blood. So we start to try and contain him so that we can get him to a rescue squad to get him to a hospital. Well, come to find out, he had been smoking marijuana laced with PCP. He was not cooperative to our efforts, did not want to stop what he was doing and get medical treatment. As we were struggling with him to get him contained, I could see cuts on his elbows. He had attempted to jump out of the sliding glass door, and with it still closed. And he had busted through the glass, but the glass cut his arms down to the bone. You could see exposed bones on both elbows. We get him over to a couch, get him down on the couch, trying to just get him handcuffed. Again, he's covered in blood. It's hot. He's sweaty. It's hard to get a hand grip on him. We didn't have time to put like rubber gloves or anything for our safety on. It was this quick happening. And at one point we got him face down and he's flailing his arms, and the other officer grabs him by the wrist and then by the elbow. And I could see by his motion that he was going to bend that guy's arm in a manner that it's not supposed to be bent, and it was going to break his arm. And I said, "Don't break his arm." And he said, "Oh." And he stopped, and we continued on. And eventually we did get him contained, got him strapped down to a gurney for a rescue squad, and we got him to the hospital. We were completely covered in blood. The nameplate on my uniform had blood in the lettering. Was how much blood was in this place. How he stayed conscious through all this is beyond me. But at the hospital with him, the other officer came to me and said, "Thanks. I was going to break his arm." He said, "I was so scared. We couldn't get him. I was going to break his arm to get his arm behind him." He said, "Thanks for bringing that to my attention." I was like, "No problem." Didn't want to cause any unnecessary injury to him that he hadn't already caused to himself. So that's the long and short of that story.
Yeah. And he was so covered in blood that they had to give him scrubs and he had to take his uniform off at the hospital. And he came home in scrubs from the hospital. So that's how much, was around and just trying to fight with him. But what were you going to say, Barry? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're okay with it. So, Robbie, in that, what I'm sort of curious about is, first off, I couldn't envision being in that situation. So you show up. It's almost, to me, it would be an officer's worst nightmare, right? You got an open door. You see blood on walls. You know there's another officer in here. Until you hear a voice, you don't know who's cut, who's hurt, whatever. So how do you keep, or in that moment at least, your tiger's out because you got to be on alert, right? The minute you put on the uniform, your tiger's out, so you're ready. But you also have to keep Al present. And so like even up into that kind of trying to contain him, even your fellow officer, he had Tiger out. Like, I was going to break his arm to get it in here, but he had Al enough present to actually hear you. Yes. When you say, "Hey, you're going to break his arm," and he's like, "Oh, yes."
Yeah, that's the co-regulation piece. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So all of this is taking place. How do you keep yourself grounded, I guess, when you're in a situation like that?
Well, the only thing I can relate it to is my personal fears of what I feared as an officer. And I became a police officer to support myself and to support my family. To do anything like intentionally break someone's arm or worse or something else like that could end my career as a police officer. So that was always going through my mind. In fact, sadly, it went through my mind more than my own personal safety. Because if something happened to me at work, my family would be taken care of. And so that was everything that I did, I was always thinking about liability. And I knew that as a police officer, you're not only responsible for yourself, you're responsible for the actions of the officers around you, because you are there to protect people from themselves, from others, and from the police, as some officers and incidents around the country have found out. You know, just standing there not doing anything doesn't relieve them of any guilt of anything, of what the other people do. You can't just stand by and watch something happen. And so that's
it really is a thinking person's job to a certain degree.
yes.
To be able to keep those parts in line, you got to remember your training. You got to remember the rules, remember the laws, remember your purpose. And the whole time you might be you've got somebody that's, basically whacked out on PCP that's fighting against you, that you are trying to actually help. That would just be frustrating in and of itself. I know from the counseling perspective, you're trying to help somebody so desperately, and it's like, will you just let me help you? So there has to be there has to be regulation in law enforcement.
I think the regulation required for officers is more than almost any other profession that I know of. I think about it the same as like doctors, right? Like if they're in the middle of a surgery that they maybe are really well trained for, but something goes awry, right? Something goes wrong. They have to be able to think on their feet. They have to think about multiple things, and so, and even though doctors probably still have that fear of liability, they don't necessarily have the fear of a physical safety threat of their own safety. Right. And so police officers have that threat because, like Robbie said, their job is to go in there. And like he said, like the kids' roommates or friends or whatever were standing there, just in shock, watching, all this happen. I guess the ones that called the police. So, but the officers are the ones tasked to come in here, grab a guy who's covered in blood, naked, and on drugs. And so his regulations obviously off the charts. They have to maintain their own regulation. They have to look out for their fellow officers. They have to look out for the citizens. So the amount of ability, and Robbie and I were talking about this last night, talk about doing this today. They have to have not only a tiger that's extremely well trained, it has to communicate with the owl, and they have to communicate really fast, because he needs his sympathetic. He needs his tiger. I actually, when I'm training about trauma and things, I will use law enforcement as an example that they have to train themselves to be hypervigilant, because if they're in uniform or they're in that police car and something goes wrong around them, everyone's going to look to them to handle it. Or if someone is trying to do something bad, and we were talking about this too, because law enforcement represents potentially the loss of someone's freedom, then they're going to be totally dysregulated, just even at the sight of a police officer. Or if they go in to rob somewhere and don't notice the police officer sitting in the corner, or they do notice the police officer, they're going to be the first target. Because they don't want, they know they're the ones that are going to end up costing them their freedom. Obviously it's not the officer costing their freedom, it's breaking the law that costs you your freedom. However, the officer represents, like the system that takes away someone's freedom in that moment or as a threat. So there's a lot of regulation here, but it's different than between two people, when Barry and I are just talking as friends or whatever, there's a level of safety there. But for a police officer, he could walk up to a stranger and they're going to immediately have a stress response just because, it's like, oh, what did I do? What do you want? What's wrong? And so they have to deal with their own dysregulation, but they also have to deal with people who often become dysregulated just simply at their presence.
Well, and that's one of the things I was going to ask you about, Robbie. I don't want to go too far off topic. I want to learn something here. I want our watchers and listeners to learn something as well. So there is probably a great deal of truth. I know you can't speak unequivocally to this, but to the gut instinct, your nervous system. Like when you walk up to a car and you're reading somebody else's regulation, your gut's telling you this person's being straightforward, this person's being evasive. Would you say that's true with some of the, I don't want to say better officers, but with some officers that you've encountered or that you've experienced yourself, that there's some truth to that gut instinct as far as nervous system, recognizing nervous system is what I'm getting at.
What I like to consider the gut instinct is more based on your training. The better an agency is, the better training it provides. I was very fortunate to work for an agency that was highly, highly dedicated to training. They spent, their training budget was huge, and we were constantly training. And they trained us on a very regular basis to what to look for in situations. If you see this, this could be an indication that this is about, something bad is about to happen. So yes, your gut reaction is, all these things coming together based off of what your eye is seeing, but your gut has learned from your training and your experience and your life experiences. And that's why older officers tend to handle more stressful situations usually better than younger officers because they've had more experience. And maybe sometimes, unfortunately, they've learned the hard way. I tried this, it blew up in my face, I got in trouble or whatever. Ain't gonna do that again. So they've gotten to the point where that doesn't work, let me try something else. And again, through the training and the years of experience, they learn what works and what doesn't work and what to look for and what are the signs that tell you. It's just like going down the road and you see the sign that says traffic light ahead and you go around the corner, you've already slowed down because you've seen that sign, there's a stoplight ahead, and you get around the corner, sure enough, there's a stoplight and it's red for you, but you've already slowed down because you saw that sign. And so it's education, I think, and training.
It does. It sounds like it's education, training, and awareness, because we talk about the, tiger taming drills. It's, you're kind of learning that as you go through the law enforcement training, recognizing what's going on in your body, what you're bringing to the table. Quick question for you on it, Amy. I don't want to take this over, but a quick question for Robbie on this one. Now, you are an individual, so you can't speak for all police officers, and I don't want to dive into your personal business, but I am sort of curious. Do you ever cut the tiger off? Like, you're out of the uniform, or you can speak to other officers where you've seen them be able to do this, like, because it seems like it's so ingrained in who a law enforcement officer is. That's part of their makeup, right? To be hypervigilant. Like Amy said, that hypervigilance is necessary, and kind of being in that sympathetic nervous system is necessary. But now it's Saturday. You're in a bathing suit. You're sitting by the pool. Are you able to cut the tiger off and say, I can be chill right now. I don't need to be on high alert?
As far as high alert, yes, you can cut it off. But as far as being ever vigilant, no. There's things that you're trained to look for that when you see them in your everyday life, and I'll go into a short story. Amy and I were in a food court in a shopping mall one day. It was July. It was very, very hot outside. We were thankful to be eating inside the food court where it was air conditioned. And as we were sitting there eating, I happened to see a gentleman go across the food court dressed in long pants, some type of shirt that I couldn't see because he also had on a very long, heavy trench coat. Keep in mind, this is July. He had to get there somehow to this shopping mall. And he was carrying a very large shopping bag from a department store that was no longer in business and had not been in business for years. And I thought to myself, this is an unusual situation. I wonder what this guy is doing here today and what he's got in that bag. But he continued through the food court and out of the food court. I did not see him again. And I watched for him to come back, but I didn't do anything at that point. I didn't jump up and run to follow him or to try and get, somebody's attention, say, hey, this guy needs to be looked at or kept an eye on. But I couldn't help but notice him and how he was dressed in the bag. Because the first thing that drew my attention to him was he was carrying a bag from a store that I used to shop at and was very upset that it had gone out of business. And I'm like, there's something you don't see every day. And then I look at the rest of him. I'm like, yeah, he is not dressed appropriately. But so no, you can't ever completely cut it off. It's what you do for a living, especially, in the agency I was in, majority of my days were 10-hour days. So you do that 10 hours a day, 40 hours a week. It's kind of ingrained in you.
Oh.
I would say, I would think about it as with polyvagal theory, when we talk about our sympathetic system, the sympathetic system isn't always just about danger, right? It's also about, like you said, like protection. It's about motivation, all of that. So I think what Robbie's saying is kind of like that radar, that neuroception that we all have anyway. But for police officers, it's a very kind of highly tuned neuroception that you can't really turn off, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're in a state of danger. And that was what I was thinking about when you guys were talking about the gut reaction or the gut feeling, right? The gut is trying to decide, the gut's on alert, but the gut's trying to decide, is this an actual physical threat? Is this that they're just upset and nervous because they got stopped by a police officer? Because that person, again, I remember my first time I got stopped at 16, I was like frozen. And he's like, do you remember making this turn? And I'm like, no, because I literally didn't remember it, because I'm like in my head going, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me. They're going to take the car away. They're going to take my license. I'm in this fear mode. Not about the officer. He was polite. Like, I wasn't scared of the officer, but it was the consequences, right? Of you broke a law, you make it, and I did. I got a ticket, and my parents didn't kill me. So they didn't. They made me pay the ticket. I had to pay the ticket, but they didn't take the car away or anything. So, so it was my own thoughts and fears that were causing my tiger to wake up in that situation. It wasn't the officer, but it was just the situation. But the officer has to read, like you said, like read the room and read what's going on. And he also has to make really split-second fast decisions. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever seen, there's a lot of news stories out there about like reporters, that will talk about the decisions that officers make, and then they go run them through one of the shoot, don't shoot scenarios, and then they realize how hard it is, that your own nervous system, when that person's coming at you that's 2 feet taller than you and you're feeling like you're in threat, those reporters would choose shoot, but they would have been accused of murder possibly if they had done that in real life. So how difficult it is to make those decisions, but how people are wired, and how their brain is. So we joke all the time about how fast Robbie's brain is and how fast he thinks through things and the stuff that goes through his head so quickly. But it also it kept him alive, which I'm thankful for. So, I think, but it's not just about him having a great tiger, because his tiger could get you in trouble if you don't have your owl present, right? So, and that's the officers, I think, that tend to get themselves into trouble, either get themselves or someone else hurt or end up hurting someone, is because their tiger has taken over and they're not listening to the owl anymore. And so, which was kind of like what was happening with that other officer. He said, this was a scary situation. They were scared for that guy's life. They knew he needed medical attention. They had to get him to it, but he wasn't cooperating. They were physically wearing out because they're trying to, take care of him, and they've only got, so much of their own strength. And if we wear out, what's going to happen? Because this guy obviously doesn't care about us in this moment. He's, on the influence of the drugs. So, there's so much that they're trying to take into account, not to mention all their SOPs and directives they have to follow that you got to keep in mind.
I tell a story, and Robbie, you might be able to expand on this or relate with this in some way. When I'm talking with folks about it's okay to have the feeling, it's just a matter of what you do with it. And the example I use is I have an unreasonable fear of heights. I've joked about it before. As a kid, I was on a carport of a house, like 7 foot up. They had to call the fire department to get me off the carport. So I had this very unreasonable fear of heights. And so I was at this kind of ropes course type thing, and it was about a 30-foot rope fence going up. And taking the dare of my children, they're like, Daddy's not going to climb that. He's not going to do it. Daddy's afraid of heights. Do it. So I grabbed hold of it. I let him put me in the harness, and I climbed all the way to the top, rang the bell, held on with one hand, and waved. All right. So they're all blah, 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 blah. Well, then I explained to the kids, I said, I had a choice. I said, I can either let the fear of falling prevent me from trying this, or I can let the fear of falling make me hold on tighter, move cautiously, watch my grip, know my limitations. And so fear was a motivator because I don't want to fall. I'm going to hold on tighter and be more cautious. So I think, with officers, you've got to be, you walk into that house situation. You should have a little bit of fear, but the fear can't cause you to turn around and walk out. And so have you experienced that, or would you go along with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I haven't met an officer yet who didn't experience some level of fear, usually on a daily basis. And I would be concerned about any officer that never actually had any real fear.
I mean, how are you protecting yourself? If you don't have any fear whatsoever, you're going to walk in there, gung-ho, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry.
Yeah, and that can get yourself other people hurt as well.
Have you seen that in your experience? I know you have some other stories out there, but in your experience, have you seen that come across? You don't have to name names, but the situation or the officer that just you couldn't get it through their head that that what they're doing is reckless.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I had an officer that frequently put himself in a position where he could injure himself, or the person he was trying to arrest could injure him or somebody else. That officers come in to assist him could be injured as a result of trying to come very quickly to him. And this officer just would not stop this one act. And he was not doing anything technically wrong. He just wasn't using the best discretion. And, not trying to go into too much detail for identity purposes, but he was enforcing the law. He was well within his rights as a law enforcement officer, but he wasn't using the best judgment for his own safety, for the public's safety, and for his coworkers' safety.
So, it's the amount of lives that are involved. You've got, in some instances, you've got, and I think about all the tigers that are out, right? You've got the perpetrator, you've got the potential victim, you might have your partner with you, you might have an innocent bystander, and everybody's having some form of tiger out in some way, shape, or form. And I always say, when you get that many tigers together, especially if it's in a smaller area, like an apartment or something like that, it's just too much energy in the room. And now I understand, and it's probably really old school when I say it. When the officer says, just move along, there's nothing to see here. Just move along, there's nothing to see here. Like, I don't need any more energy at this scene right now. But it makes sense because, you're onlooker, right? The rubberneckers, as they say. You got your crowd of 10 people, and now with police officers, everybody's got a phone out someplace. What is he going to do? What is he going to do? Yeah. Officers run around with cameras on their chest, with their body cams. So not only am I watching, the boss is watching, supervisors are watching, the public is watching. And if I bend this guy's arm the wrong way, somebody's going to scream police brutality, not realizing that he's high on PCP. And if I let go of his arm, he might grab my gun. He might have a weapon.
But, the one good thing about that is, I'm a big fan of the police body cameras because we don't edit those. We don't have an option to edit those. When the boss sees the video, it's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
If any individual does a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, request for that body cam video, they get the entire video from start to finish. There is no editing in it. Whereas some citizen recording you on their telephone can stop it here, stop it there, just as I've seen done on network television news. One of the local channels I saw edit video I knew was not correct because I'd seen the actual full-length video. Excuse me. So I think that actually helps regulate officers because they know everything they do is going to be recorded. I think that helps ground you because it's actually the police body camera is there for your protection. And when people tell lies about things you said and did, the video doesn't lie. And so, you know, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Would you say that the advent of that, or, you know, I mean, it's been around for a while now, the body cams and such. Would you say that does help with providing some regulation, which sounds weird? Say, okay, I've got a camera on me. It makes me more regulated. I would imagine it could make the right officers feel safer.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Think about when you're in a room with another guy who's your peer, you're going to talk to him and use language that you wouldn't use potentially if you were in a room with your mother.
Right.
So that camera is always your mother present. And, you know, think about it. And that's what I would tell young officers. Always speak to people the way you speak to your mom or the way you want other people to speak to your mom. If you would get upset if somebody said that to your mother, don't say it to somebody else. And I think the body cam helps officers to regulate that and realize, you know, I might just be mean this other guy who's my age and, you know, he's calling me names, so it's okay for me to call him names. But with that camera there, like, no, I'm not going to stoop to his level. I'm not going to get myself in trouble. I think the camera can help regulate you, bring you
Amy, back. There's something for our viewers and listeners. Regulation revolution. Get a body cam for your marriage. Guys, pretend like your mother.
Pretend like it's your mom.
We can solve all couples issues with this.
There you go. Might have a marketing deal thing going on there.
Well, you know, a lot of people have security cameras inside their homes for, I always thought it was because of break-ins or larcenies and stuff like that. Maybe it's just to record their spouse so their spouse doesn't call them bad names, or they don't get mad at their spouse and call them bad names.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Robbie, do you mind sharing that other story? The one where you went around the house? Yes. Because I think what's interesting is that's the one that we were talking about, how quickly everything went through your head and had to make a decision in a split second. And how, you know, how that played out.
Yes, I don't mind at all. What Amy's referring to is I was very, very fortunate in my long career, especially as I spent a lot of years working the road and uniform patrol, that I never actually had to shoot anybody. I was very, very fortunate. But the closest I ever came was on I believe the date was on December 22nd. It was the last night that I was working the road before I was going to be off for Christmas. I had taken Christmas off that year. I always look forward to Christmas, love Christmas, especially when you have kids. It's just the best time of the year for me. And so this was my last night before the Christmas break. And I was getting ready to get off in about an hour. And myself and another officer got a call of a domestic between an adult brother and sister at a house. And I was actually the backup, but I was closer than the primary officer. And I got there and they had told us that whoever had called in had told the communications officer that the front porch had been removed from the house. They were having a new one built on, that you could not get in the front door and you had to go around to the back door. So I get there and look, sure enough, there's no front porch. There's no way without a ladder to get up to this front door. So I start walking around the side of the house. And as I got by these bushes that lined the side of the house, a man jumped out holding a pitchfork, and he screamed, "I am not going back to jail. I am going to kill you." So at this point, I mean, he's at this point 4 to 5 feet away from me. I took one step backwards and pulled my gun, aimed it at him. And what went through my mind at this point is, if I turn to run, he could run. I don't know how fast he can run. He possibly could catch up with me and stab me with this pitchfork. Pitchforks can penetrate a ballistic vest. It can penetrate your neck. And if you do it hard enough, it can cause some serious head trauma. I did not want to turn my back to this guy. What also went through my mind was, if he is so close that if he lunges at me, he's got me. So if he moves either his left foot or his right foot one step closer to me, I'm going to shoot him. And I am going to shoot him until he stops coming towards me. Then what starts going through my mind is, today is December 22nd. This is my last working day prior to the holiday. If I have to shoot this guy, I'm going to be suspended. I'm going to be investigated. I might get arrested. I might go to jail. I might get in trouble with the division. I might lose my job. All this is going through my mind as my finger is on the trigger. And fortunately, the words that came out of my mouth is, "If you come closer, I will shoot you." And fortunately for me, he turned and ran the other way. And this interaction was probably 3-4 seconds between him jumping out saying he was going to kill me and me saying, "If you come closer, I will shoot you."
So that is the true, to me, that is such a true example of, all right, so we're in Tiger, we're in sympathetic. This is fight, flight, or freeze time, literally. And it happens so rapidly, it sounds like. It's like, okay, flight, I'm going to take off running. This guy might run faster than me. He might just chunk that thing like a javelin at me. Well,
Yes.
True full-on fight is, I just shot him, period. So Al still had to stay present and bring up this other, what will my next 24 hours look like? What will my next 2 months look like? What will this do to my family? So you've got this rapid processing going on with the Al saying, okay, guys, kind of huddle up here. We got to make a quick decision.
Yeah.
And I mean, you made all of that. It wasn't, and for our listeners and viewers, and Amy, you correct me on it, it wasn't a 3-second decision. It was like a 3,000 millisecond decision. It happened so fast.
Yeah. And, and that's, what was interesting when we were talking about this and going back through these stories last night was, it's incredible how fast that conversation between his Tiger and Al happened. And they were both extremely important. If he had been all Al, he may not have thought to pull his gun to protect himself or to step backwards. And Robbie knows that he's actually even fortunate that the guy didn't just wait in the bushes and just stab him. Like he jumped out in front of him, which gave Robbie an opportunity to protect himself, because he certainly could have, done that. And I was shocked to learn about how the pitchfork will go through a Kevlar vest. People think a Kevlar vest is, like Iron Man or something, and that, nothing will come through it. And, they are designed to stop bullets. They're not designed to stop knives, pitchforks, or anything like that. So a lot of people who think that someone isn't a threat because they don't have a gun isn't true. Like, they are a threat. And so, the officer has to do to keep himself safe or whoever. And like the guy said, he didn't want to go back to jail. So he didn't care who Robbie was or who his family was or anything like that. He was in his own Tiger mode of, I don't want to go back to jail. You represent someone who can send me back to jail, and I don't want to go.
And I picture that that rapid thinking, the conversation, like you said, between the owl and the tiger. It always give illustrations that are probably terrible, but I try my best. When I'm talking with folks, clients, it's pretty much, and this is really going slow with it. Hey, tiger, this guy's got a pitchfork. What do you think? Kill him. Oh, wait a minute. We can't just kill him. Well, let's run. Well, wait, he might be able to catch up with us. Well, what do you want to do, Al? Well, let's see if we can give him some advice, like don't step any closer or I will shoot you. Does that make you happy, Al, Tiger? And Tiger says, yeah, that seems like a reasonable response. And I tell people that this is happening in your head all the time with parts work and everything else. It's just for some, it's happening faster. And for some, it's happening a little bit slower. Part of it has to do with your job, your training, your personality, your limbic system, all of that goes into this. And so there is something true, I believe, to that statement. You're overthinking it, right? Like sometimes we are overthinking it. I tell folks quite often that it's not necessarily as important to know where you're going as it is to know where you can't stay. And so the example I give, again, terrible example, I'm in a 2-story house. The house is on fire. The stairs are blocked. The hallway's blocked with fire. I know I can't stay in the fire. I don't know what's going to happen if I jump out the window, but I know I can't stay in the fire. I'm going to burn up. And so it's like in that moment, let's not overthink it too much. Number one job, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know how the rules have changed. Your job was to go home alive, right, Robbie? That's part of your job, is to go home to your family. So in that moment, that conversation is happening. You can't really overthink it. You can't sit there and say, well, he's got some long legs. He's about 20 years old and he's got about 10 years. And yeah, we ain't got time to do all that.
Yeah.
But that is something, I don't know what I would do, in that situation. But now here's the other interesting part. Law enforcement, when I say this one, Robbie, I'm sure somebody out there will tear me up for it, has a different set of rules. I walk around back at my house on my property and you jump out with the pitchfork, I just shoot you. I'm not worried about the law. I'm not here to take you back to jail. And I'll probably have an easier time justifying it than the police officer would. Because somebody will come along and say, well, he was 65 years old and he didn't really step towards you. He just kept poking it towards you like that. So, you could have reasoned with him. Whereas I just go, yeah, he jumped out with a pitchfork, shot him. It was on my property.
Yeah.
Oh. So anyway.
And I also look at the fact just to, I'm sort of even after being married to Robbie, and for those that don't know, I answered 911 for almost 20 years. So, and even the difference in that, a lot of people don't realize how difficult that job is, but we don't have the physical threat. So even though we have the emotional situation going on, the energy, and we're trying to get people help, we're trying to get the police officers, we're trying to get information, we aren't under necessarily a physical threat, but that doesn't mean our tiger isn't out. It doesn't mean that we're not having emotional reactions to those situations. And in some ways, it's almost worse in the fact, not worse in the threat, but worse in the impact, because we often send people to emergency situations and we never know what happens. So there's that energy that doesn't get to be released. Whereas, the officer gets to, it's scary, but he has that power, right? And he has that weapon to be able to manage the threat. Whereas for us, we can feel a threat and then there's not a lot we can do about it when you're answering the phone. But to me, that just shows the extra layer that's on top of it for officers. That's when like with social media, people talk about keyboard warriors, like people will say things and stuff that they wouldn't necessarily say to somebody to their face. It's the same thing. Like people would actually be nastier to us on the phone than they would to the officer in person, not only because they were there in person, but the officer also could arrest them. So I can't arrest them over the telephone. So, but it just shows that extra layer that they not only are dealing with their own tigers, the tigers of the people in front of them, but their own physical threat. And so we actually had a situation because we worked for the same department that Robbie actually had a mayday while I was working the police radio one time. So I'm literally having to dispatch people to my husband's mayday. But I'll let you tell that story. We can make this our last little story, but it was also different for him from the pitchfork story. So the nuances to me are incredible, because I'm like, you hit your mayday. So to me, like, it was the worst thing for me, because I'm stuck behind the desk and my husband's, under threat. And and I told him, in my head, I was like, hold on, honey, I'm coming, I was going to be his backup. But, I had my own tiger going on, but he had the real threat in that situation.
Yeah. Well, this situation, I'll try to make it as brief as possible. I had to arrest a gentleman actually in his own home. And when it became clear and obvious that I was going to make the arrest, he decided to retreat in his house to the stairwell going upstairs. I have no idea at this point why he's doing this, if he's going to try and barricade himself or if he's going to get a weapon such as a knife or a firearm or something else. So I start chasing him. We go up the stairs. I catch him about midway up the stairs. Once I got a hold of him on the stairs, my tiger was more in check at that point. Okay, I've got you. You can't get up the stairs to get a weapon to harm me. So I basically had him in a headlock with my left arm, and I reached down, pushed the Mayday button so that I could get assistance to me, and I took the mace out. And the only problem with that was I held it up to his face and told him, stop, or you're going to get it right in the face, which was actually a bluff, because I would have maced myself as well, which would have left me very, very vulnerable. But he did not want to be maced, and he immediately said, okay, you got me. But no.
So there was another great tiger owl combination, right? Like the tiger bluffed the threat, even though the owl knew, I can't push the button on this mace.
Yeah.
And
when you're sharing that, though, and I'm listening, and as I'm listening to these stories, I'm just wondering, and Amy, if I'm taking us off track, let me know. Two areas I wonder if you could speak to, Robbie. One, with those experiences, what is something not just law enforcement, but I'm thinking firefighters, first responders, what can you do for your own mental health? I mean, in your experience, you've had to decompress from situations. You got to be hyper vigilant, but you can't be a nervous wreck. So what are some techniques that you can use? So you're not recommending it to anybody else, but that you've used yourself to kind of help you with your own mental health, that, hey, I almost got stabbed. I almost got beat up. Almost got shot.
Yeah. And that's a difficult thing to say, because when I would decompress, it really wasn't an intentional act. And I think what always helped me to decompress was, one, usually in the instance, just like Amy said with the guy that jumped out of the bushes. It didn't occur to me until after he was in custody and we had gone through all this, that if he had waited a little bit longer, there would have been absolutely nothing I could have done to defend myself at that point. Mm-hmm. If he had waited till I got even with him in the bushes, he could have had me. Or if he had waited till I got past him, he'd have been behind me and could have had me. And at that point, when I think about that, I was like, well, I'm glad he didn't. And I'm good, and all is right with the world. I'm not suspended. I didn't have to shoot anybody, and I didn't get hurt or killed. And I'm still going to make an income and support my family. And that's what decompressed me. Other than that, just nothing specific that I did. Okay. I'm learning that there's a lot of things that people do that is things that I thought before were kind of, just excessive self-indulgence, such as yoga or massages, things like that, to help people decompress and to regulate, listening to music, different things like that, I think are very good. Whatever someone uses that helps them, I think it's good. But me personally, I just always, was able to relax in the fact that, okay, I can still get up tomorrow, go to work and take care of my family.
Okay. And the other thing to speak to, mental health and law enforcement, as far as the individuals like calls and such like that you went on. I know you probably can't give a firm statistic, but how many would you say actually involve mental health issues with individuals, with officers having to respond?
Quite a few. That's why in the agency that I came from, I think now it's mandatory that every single officer going through the academy goes through crisis intervention team training, because we do deal with so many people that are consumers of the mental health system on a daily basis. And to give you a short story, when I assisted with the hiring process, when candidates would come to take the physical agility test, they also went through a brief interview. And in that brief interview, this is separate from the other things that they had been interviewed on, I would ask them questions, basically just try and get an idea if they knew what law enforcement was and what was going to be expected of them. And the question was, what do you think that you'll be doing on a daily basis as a uniformed patrol officer? What are some of the things that you think you'll be doing? And more than not, candidates would say, writing speeding tickets, going on alarms, stopping bank robbers, stopping, murderers, all the things you see on television. And I said, those things can happen. However, the majority of what I do is go on domestics and deal with mental health consumers in need. And, that's one of the things I think is highly overlooked. And people, preparing for a career in law enforcement, if they know it going in, they'll be better off. And the more you learn about the mental health system and what causes people to do the things that they do over and over and over, the better your career will go for you, and the more help you can be to the public. But yes, it is. I don't know the actual numbers. I've never looked it up. But to answer your question, the number of consumers that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is very high.
Yeah, I think you're saying something like, you only deal with about 10% of the population, but probably like 80 to 90% of the time. And so for people who don't deal with having to have law enforcement in their neighborhood or having to call law enforcement on a regular basis, they don't see what officers are doing on a daily basis. So, there's a lot, there. And I know, when I was learning and going to school and becoming a therapist and learning all about this trauma stuff, I think for Robbie, he said it was helpful for him to understand more about why the people that he encountered or what happened to them. And, I don't know if he's a very empathetic person, and he's always looking out for those people. But I think it just helped him to understand more. Why is it these same people that, I keep having to arrest, or the same people that keep doing the same things, like what is, what's going on here? And so him learning about like traumatic memories, or, are being wired for protection instead of connection, and all that good stuff has helped him as an officer to understand, and I think as far as, coming back to sort of polyvagal and policing, I think it would be extremely helpful for law enforcement officers to not only understand that of the people they're dealing with, but also for themselves, or how they can help each other, like he did in that instance for that officer, that, when he was, about to cross a line, Robbie was able to help him regulate and not do that. And I know this officer, and that's not who he is as a person. This wasn't something intentional that he's just, woke up that morning and said, I'm just going to go break somebody's arm. Like, that's not the case. Like, it was a split second emergency crisis type situation, which is of course what's different for them, because not only are their lives, on the line, it's other people's lives. And so it's heavy duty stuff. And I think it really does take somebody who does have a very good, like you said, the team of the tiger and the owl sort of communicating really well, and also not allowing their own stuff to get in the way, which we know on a daily basis for all of us is hard to do. And these officers have to set their own junk aside. And I used to joke, we talk about parts work. I would say that Robbie and Officer or Sergeant Reamer were like two different people. And it wasn't that he was completely different. It was he had to be a different person while he was in his job because of the role he was in. And so when you meet him as Robbie, he's not the same as if you were to meet him in uniform to a degree. Because I rode with him on many occasions. And I'm not saying that he was a totally different person, but it was that alertness. It was that tiger and that owl that are now like, here and present and have to deal with this. And so when you're talking about decompressing, I think that's part of what they have to do, is they have to be very good in their containment of, keeping it and leaving it there at work and taking the uniform off. And that also is sort of taking off that going on. But there are parts of it that you can't. And it's unfortunate because, of course, their bodies end up taking a huge toll because of this work. The instances of heart disease and cancer, and the numbers are out there. Suicide, alcoholism, that's all much higher in the law enforcement field than other professions, because they may not be able to either contain it, or they're not able to manage it, or they don't seek help for it. So I would just say, like, on a daily basis, if they don't, it's just like anything else. It's like a grief and a loss. You're going to feel it for a while, but if it doesn't go away, if it doesn't start getting better, you probably need to ask for help and seek that help. And that can be hard. It's a profession, they're the ones that come in and fix everything and keep everybody safe. And so it can be hard for them to admit that they might need some help with something. So it's a difficult road for folks. Anything else you want to add, Robbie?
Amy, I'm losing you a little bit here on the podcast.
The one thing that I would add to what Amy just said, police departments are ever evolving and they're ever learning. And one of the good things is, the old school mentality from the 20s and 30s of the 1900s, since we're in the 2020s, of walk it off, be a man, be strong, be a woman, don't let this get you down. Don't let it defeat you. And that's it. That's all the help you got are gone. Now agencies have evolved. They've been trained. They train their supervisors. They train the officers, for self-awareness and, awareness of others, and what to do if you realize or see that someone is struggling from a situation. A lot of times they don't even wait that long. If you're involved in something that, is known to be stressful, they're going to do something to preemptively see that you get any help that you might need. They've done an excellent job of that, and they're constantly getting better as education becomes more prevalent, more available. Just as Amy was saying, I wish I knew at the end of my career. I wish I knew in the beginning of my career what I knew at the end of my career about the people that I worked to protect, why they did the things they did, what caused them to be in the situation they were in. And it helped me with a lot more empathy and compassion for these people, as opposed to, darn you, you've done this before, you're doing it again. You're a menace to yourself. You're a menace to society. Stop it. Well, that doesn't work. And, and we arrest these people over and over and over till something really horrible happens. Either they die, they get incarcerated forever because they've seriously injured or killed somebody. And it's just a never-ending process in the old way. But now that we're learning about mental health and its effect on people and what has caused them to get, to point B, is a long road a lot of times from point A, and nothing was done at point A to help them not get to B. And so that's a very good thing.
I am glad that you survived your career in law enforcement
And his marriage.
that law enforcement is moving in this direction. Do what?
And
his marriage. Talk about
so far
about needing recognition all over. So far. Okay, we're at that magical time. Robbie Reamer, thank you so much for being here with us. Amy,
Thanks for having me.
thank you. Our viewers, you can hear us on Spotify and other locations. You can watch us on YouTube. Revolution. You can click on. You can follow Facebook, our website. That's all your opinions, your comments, your recommendations, and your criticisms. So stay tuned for more. There's many other podcasts we put out there. Again, Robbie, thank you for being here. Amy, thank you for letting me tag along. Go this ride along.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bye, baby.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'll catch you down the road.